Alright, so Eric, I have some questions I want to ask you. And one thing that I immediately noticed when I started playing the Zoom games is how much tighter they are than what I'm used to. So the average VPIP for the tables is like 16. And I think it's a combination of guys playing really, really tight. And also, I guess, like some of the fish playing a little bit tighter too. So since people are playing a lot tighter and we make a lot of our money from people playing overly loose, how are we gonna should we expect our win rate to differ from the ring games to the Zoom games?
Well, I would say that your win rate shouldn't be changed that much if you adapt well. Now, that being said, I know a lot of players who get frustrated and can't make the big folds versus nits or having a bad session, can't lay down a hand in a spot where like somebody with a 9 VPIP never has anything but aces. Where you don't want to be, you just want to be making sure that you have the discipline because the way you're going to make money from these guys is kind of much more nickel and diming them and taking small amounts of money from them, which is still as profitable. They're going to basically let you run over the table, get to the fish quicker. And like basically they're just going to play, only when they have a strong hand. Whereas, you might be able to raise from early position with something like king queen to like isolate a guy who's say even in the small blind who's a fish, because there are so many nits on the table and it'll be a super easy fold later. So it's all about making the adaptations to take care of all of the nittiness going on around you. But I would say that in general, the win rates are going to slightly fall, but that's not due to the fact that the games can't be beat for that. It's simply because players have a tough time adjusting to these nits.
Yeah, actually, it took me a little while to figure out where my edge was in these games because people were playing so tight. But then, like, as I started playing more, I noticed exactly what Eric's talking about, where we can kind of like open up our ranges when these really tight players are behind us and just steal more essentially, and kind of make up the win rate in that way. And another bonus of those hands is you don't pay any rake if you win pre-flop. So, another question I had. So, like in Zoom, people aren't going to be sitting at one table with us for a long time. So, like, how should we treat balance as far as our overall game plan and like how exploitable we're playing?
Balance is always important. But again, this goes back to kind of that conversation about it being like Zoom being kind of a non-linear game as opposed to ring games kind of being very linear in the sense of like you see the next hand after that. Whereas you're getting little bits and pieces of people's games in no particular order. So it's kind of one of these things where your balance is important. Where I can tell you that, when you get an image with players over 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 hands, you really need balance to work in your games, especially deep stacked, where players are never going to pay you off unless you have this reputation of kind of being a maniac in these spots. But at the same time, be careful, much like any other time you're dealing with balance, to not be balanced in spots where the other player is not even paying attention, because that's when balance comes back to bite you in the ass.
Yeah, and I think like for a lot of the guys like who are playing, so like if you're not playing a really large volume hands, you're not gonna have that kind of dynamic with other players where you have thousands of hands played with each other. So maybe like don't be too worried about balance when you're starting off, but then as you play more with a player, you gotta start thinking about how they're gonna adapt and how you're gonna adapt to them.
Yep, and that's absolutely the case. And honestly, it's kind of it's exactly like everything else in poker. The balance is important, but just make sure that you're doing it against regulars.
Cool, yeah, definitely. There's no need to balance your game versus someone who's not paying attention, as you said.
That's absolutely true.